Howdy folks, this is Deacon Parsons. Seems like about every week I read something in the internet news, either about some spoiled rotten kid getting put in jail, or an Emmy or a Grammy, or their own reality show, or an article about somebody doing something just heinous and horrendous to a kid in the name of discipline. Like duct taping them into a plastic box with a hole cut in it so you can pour water on them. Or chaining up a teenage boy in the basement because he's hungry. Anyway, we're going to make this film here about child discipline, the proper way to do it. Give you a little information on the who, what, when, where, why, and how about it. It is of necessity in general terms. You're going to have to do more than monkey see, monkey do. Watch this film and raise your kids, because it's going to have to be applied to each child individually. If you think proper corporal punishment is hurting a child anytime that you're angry or upset, get help. On the other end of the pendulum, if you think that a child can just raise themselves without any influence and without any correction, you're just as bad in the opposite direction. Get help. I'm fixing to get a little long-winded. You might want to hit pause now and go get a cup of coffee, a glass of sweet tea, or something else to drink. Instilling discipline in a child is an act of love. A child is born a blank slate, a clean hard drive that needs to be programmed. The purpose of disciplining a child is to educate them well enough to stay alive long enough to become happy, healthy citizens. That takes work.
Yeah.
Okay, that takes love, real love. Not the alleged love of somebody that loves their child too much to hurt them. That's not love, that's selfishness. Real love is willing to provide the direction and training and even a little discomfort along the way, if that's what it takes to get the lesson across. A real parent takes care of their children and is looking at the present and the future.
Yeah.
Mom and dad are not the kids' friends. The kids will have many friends throughout their life. Mom and dad are the kids' parents, and the only two that they're going to do. If they don't do the parenting job, if they don't teach the children right from wrong, good from bad, success from failure, no one is, and the child could be messed up for the rest of his life. Real love means that mom and dad have to balance their wants and needs versus a child's wants and needs. Nobody gets to be first all the time. Not mom, not dad, not the kid. Everybody takes their turn in doing without to help someone else whose need is greater.
No.
Here are some basic precepts about child raising. First of all, a kid's going to learn about half of everything they're ever going to know by the time they're 5. About 3/4 by the time they're 8 years old. These are the years you have to focus on. These are the years that good habits are easiest to learn. Parents need to remember to look at the world from a child's perspective. Parents need to remember that the words that they tell a child carry the same power as God's words did in Genesis. They have the power of creation. From a child's point of view, parents are pretty much God. They can do anything. Whatever they say goes. They're always right, at least until their teenage years. This is a heavy responsibility, not something to be taken lightly. Children are programmed to believe their parents. They have no other reference. Never, under any circumstances, tell a child, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're ugly, or anything like that, because those words have the same power of God, and children will do their best to make those words truth in their life. You need to frame the child's life in positive ways, like, you're a good boy and good boys don't do that. You're a good girl and this is the way good girls act. Think back. Almost everybody can remember a time when someone in their life said something that really stuck with them. Maybe been a teacher, your parents, your grandparents, or whatever, but there was that magic moment where it all clicked and it really made an impact on a child's life. You need to remember that the people who said that didn't realize that it was a magic moment. They didn't realize that this was a time that was going to stick with this kid the rest of their life. So you as a parent have got to be aware that any time can be that magic moment. And you want to be sure that the magic moment you have with your children is positive and builds them up instead of being negative and tearing them down. As a parent, we need to be perfect. As humans, we can't be perfect. As a parent, you've got to do the best you can today with what you've got today and move on. When you make a mistake, not if, but when you make a mistake, learn the lesson and go on. The only thing worse than making a parental mistake is not being a parent at all because you're too afraid of making a mistake. One other thing, never tell a child to do something you can't force them to do. It's unreasonable and it teaches the child to ignore you. Don't lie to a child. And in this context, lying could be not enforcing what you say. If you tell the child to stop it, don't count, don't tell them again, get up and do it. Because if you tell them to stop something, you tell them to do something and you don't enforce it, and you give them second and third chances, you're just lying to them the first 2 or 3 times. And they're learning not to listen to what you say. With young children, don't use the passive-aggressive, would you please do something. Wait for that for their teenage years where they're old enough to understand the nuances of the language and of the social setting. Asking a toddler if he would do something, you're asking a question. They think they have an option. If the child doesn't have an option, tell them that up front. Some children need a firm hand. Others less so. And we must not forget that sometimes children have some learning disabilities that aren't readily apparent. So you got to keep that in the back of your mind as well. Now, as an extreme example, if you're the parent of a Down syndrome baby, it may be that because of that situation, you may never want to use one of the tools that we're going to talk about later on child discipline. It may be that isolation is too intense, or that corporal punishment is too intense, and it would be like swatting a fly with a sledgehammer. On the other hand, because of that situation, isolation may be the only thing that works, or corporal punishment may be the only thing that works. And that's something you're going to have to work out with your spouse and your doctor, because it comes down to finding what works well for that individual child. And if a child has special needs, it's going to take special situations to deal with them. Okay, you run into somewhat the same type of situation when you marry into children, or you adopt children, or somehow you acquire children that you haven't raised from a baby. You've got to look at their background. You've got to see what will and won't work. And just because it worked for one child or worked for the child that you raised from a baby, it may not be appropriate in this situation. And again, that's going to change. You're just going to have to work that out with your spouse, the kid's other parents, the state, or whatever. Different tools you have for disciplining a child. The first tool that a parent has is the parent's displeasure. Children, especially very young ones, are programmed to want to please their parents. Finding out that mom or dad is displeased with them sometimes is enough to alter their actions. You can communicate your displeasure by a stern look, a stern voice, or a short lecture. There is also isolation. Okay, this can be putting the baby in the crib to cry themselves to sleep. This can be sending the child to his room, sitting in the corner, time out, or whatever. There is also, as the child gets older, corporal punishment. We'll discuss that in detail a little bit later. And as the children outgrow corporal punishment, because children do outgrow it, then you get into the denial of privileges, where you're dealing with the child on more of an adult level. All these tools come into play, and they have a place in the disciplining of a child. It is not enough to teach a child what not to do. Ideally, a parent will teach the child what to do, giving the children a positive direction instead of just being there to tell them no You got to point them and say yes, like don't do that, do this, or here, help me. This is what we do. Positively reinforcing the child, giving them something good to do instead of just sitting them on the floor and waiting for them to get into trouble. Idle hands are the devil's workshop type of thing. Just a quick note about the gender difference among parents. In general, a mother teaches children who and what they are. A father teaches children who and what they should be. Now, sometimes these come into conflict, and going too far one way is just as bad as going too far the other. If you've got a mother that's overly protective, the child doesn't get raised the way it needs to be a happy, healthy adult. On the other hand, if dad's always trying to nip it in the bud so the child doesn't end up being a convicted criminal or something like that, that can be taken too far as well. Now, in general, as mom and dad work out these differences, as they're coming at it from these different angles, they'll work out the middle ground right there, exactly what the child needs. They'll find that they kind of balance each other, and that's what you're looking for in the child's life, is a balance between who and what they are and who and what they ought to be, and helping them grow and cultivating them along the way. Now, it should go without saying that the parents will have to present a united front to the children. Any disagreement about how to raise the children should be behind doors and out of the hearing of the children. They need to know that mom and dad are united in raising the kids. That's where the kids get their security. If you don't have that, if that doesn't happen, if the kids know they can work mom and dad against each other, everything is going to end up being in the garbage can. Okay, now we're going to go through a few scenarios, and I want to say again, these are just in generalities. You can take the basic principles, but you're going to have to tailor them for each individual child. Now, proper child discipline begins as soon as we know we're pregnant. How the mother feels about herself, her pregnancy, and the child has a huge impact on how the child's going to feel about himself. Also, how dad feels about mom and the baby comes a close second. These things must be positive. Now, I had a friend who, when she had a baby, all the parents that heard this baby cry could hear there was just some anger in the baby's cry. And she's a pretty good friend, and I asked her about it. And one day when we were talking about it, she just blurted out, well, why shouldn't he feel like he ruined my life? My mom felt like that about me my whole life. And she was really kind of surprised that she had all of this emotion welled up in her. And after she calmed down a little bit, I said, well, lucky you. You get to be the one that breaks the cycle. And she did. How a child is felt about in the womb does shape its personality and its future. And no matter how the child came about, it wasn't the child's fault. The child is innocent and deserves the best upbringing that we can provide for it. Okay, now the child is born, and the parent's job right now is to learn to communicate. The baby has only one way to communicate, and that's to fuss and cry. And most parents who've been through this will realize that pretty soon you'll be able to tell what the cry means. You know, they have a different cry for I'm hungry. They have a different cry for my diaper needs changed. They have a different cry for I've got colic. They have a different cry for I'm scared. And you have to learn at this. And at this point in time, child discipline basically centers around learning how the child speaks, keeping the child alive, keeping it fed, clean, and comforted. Getting past the newborn stage, as the child spends more time awake, the parents need to spend time bonding with it, communicating with it. And this is very important, because whomever the baby bonds with, that's who they're going to listen to, and that's who they're going to look to for their nourishment, for their comfort, for their happiness, and for their instruction later on in life. Okay, one of the first acts of discipline that will happen with the newborn baby is teaching the child to go to sleep when you put them down to go to sleep. Children, for whatever reason, never want to go to sleep when they're tired. And when you learn that it's time for the baby to take a nap, you've got to teach the child that when you put it down for a nap, you're not going to be back until they've slept. Now, this can be very hard for newborn mothers, first-time mothers, because their first instinct is to go and comfort the baby when it's crying. But the child needs to learn that no, mom and dad have decided that I need to sleep and I'm going to have to lay here until I've slept. Now, if the kid ever learns that if he just cries loud enough and long enough that you will eventually come get him, they can keep it up for hours, believe me. If mom breastfeeds, probably the first time corporal punishment is used is going to be more of an accident or a surprise than a conscious decision. As the baby's teeth come in, pretty soon the baby's going to be there suckling and it's going to bite mama's nipple hard. And she's not going to think she's going to react, and she's just going to slap that child. And like I say, should be the first time that the child is ever hit. This will surprise the baby and the mama, and this is one of your first magic moments. And it's very important that mom is prepared to take care of it. Now, one thing mom doesn't want to do is go, oh my gosh, I hit my baby, I'm a horrible mother. No. No, that's not right. The baby just bit you. You can't go around biting people. When you hurt people, they respond. Your response wasn't a response that you thought about. It was a reaction to pain. Okay, now the baby's there, the baby's surprised. It's looking at mom. So mom goes, no, we don't do that. You start suckling the child. Now, the child bites again because the child doesn't understand what it did wrong. It's just playing with its new teeth. So you suckle the baby again. If it bites you again, this time you pull it apart, pull it away. No. And you spend the time it takes to teach them that it's okay to suckle, it's not okay to bite. And depending on how quick the child is, you may pick that up in just a few minutes, or it may be that you end up having to put the child down for a nap. Saying, no, if you're going to bite mama, you go to sleep. You sit in your bed because you're not going to do that to mom. And this is very important because no child is going to treat anyone better than they treat their mother. And if they don't learn to respect mom and treat her right, they're never going to treat anybody any differently. If the baby isn't breastfed, or if it's learning to crawl around on the floor before its teeth come in, probably the first time you use corporal punishment is going to be when it tries to put something in its mouth that it shouldn't, or try to play with something that it shouldn't play with. Once you have a baby on the floor, you will find out just how much crap you have in your house that you never knew about before the baby found it and tried to eat it. And because that's what babies do, they think everything they find is they're supposed to eat and put it in their mouth. Well, that's when you begin teaching them, no, not everything is good food. Some things will hurt you. Let's say the baby sees you going over and playing with the DVD player. And pretty soon the baby's going over there and crawling up to it and trying to do the same thing. It's trying to mimic you because that's the way children are programmed. First time it does it, reaches out and touches it, you tell it no, you pick it up, you turn it around, you point it the other direction. Okay, if they go away, well and good. But sooner or later they're going to come back. They reach out and touch it, you say no, you turn around and put it the other direction. Now, as far as they're concerned, the first time they heard the word no was when they bit mom. Or this is the first time they're hearing the word no, and they're going to have to work out what no means. So they may keep coming back. Now if they come back a second or third time, they put their hand out there, you take your hand and you just pat it. And you go no, and you distract them, you send them off somewhere else. If they keep coming back, you eventually have to put a little pepper in it. Not a lot, just a little, to teach them no. Now, they may squeal and cry. Doesn't matter. They're not hurt because you're not going to hurt them. Now, it's very important that you win each one of these situations. At the very least, if they keep coming back, put them to bed and make them sleep on it. Think about something else. As a parent, you've got to kind of keep your godlike status as long as possible. The longer that you have it, the more good discipline, the more good habits you're able to impart to your child. Okay, now the baby's a little older. Baby's walking, toddling around. This is where a swat on the butt can come in. Okay, the child's over by the electric outlet trying to pry out the covers. Swat on the butt, a stern no, point them in another direction. They're trying to get into cabinets. A swat on the butt, a firm no, point them in the other direction. Now your house should be as child-proof as possible, but not everybody's can be. You go out to, Aunt Emma's house and the child's playing with her pretty glass things. You take it from it, swat on the butt, no, point them in another direction. Okay, now, if the swat on the butt doesn't work well right away, then you have to move on to a swat on the butt, a stern no, and then maybe sit them in the corner until they can learn to behave. And then, if sitting in the corner doesn't work, you may have to put them to bed. Okay, now we come to a part that's not always considered part of child discipline, but I think it's something that you really need to be aware of, is that's proper sleep and proper food. You cannot let a child stay up way late at night and not get enough sleep. You cannot feed a child junk food. You can't sugar them up and then expect them to sit still. Okay? You've got to have some balance in their life. They've got to have good, solid, nutritious meals and plenty of sleep. As a rule of thumb, kids should be in bed by 8 o'clock at night. Move that back to 9 o'clock as the kids become teenagers, and maybe 10 o'clock when they're in high school. That not only gives the kids plenty of sleep, but that gives mom and dad some time to be mom and dad, the couple, instead of mom and dad, the enforcer. We also have to think about the endurance of a child. When I was growing up, we didn't have required seat belts for children, and we could play in the back seat and all kinds of stuff. Now they strap them down with a 48,000 point harness to where the child can't move at all. You cannot strap a kid in a child seat for 2 hours, driving to grandma's, feeding them whatever you're feeding them, and then expect them to get out and behave like ladies and gentlemen. You need to consider the endurance of a child. Stop maybe at a roadside convenience store or something. Let the children get out and play and run off a little energy before they have to go to grandma's house and behave like ladies and gentlemen. Okay, now we're back to the toddling stage. Once we get outside, the big draw to a toddler is going to be the street. Now, you can explain it to them all you want, but no toddler is going to understand that a 2,000-pound Chevy plus a 15-pound kid equals a greasy spot on the road. What they will understand is that when I get near that big black piece of tar, mom and dad get upset and come over and smack me on the butt. That they can comprehend. And that's the whole point of child discipline, is to put things in a way that the children can understand and will remain safe until they're old enough to understand the physics and the reasons behind it. This is where we begin to escalate from one swat to maybe 2 or 3. Whatever it takes to get through to the child, and it should escalate in relationship to the danger to the child. Remember, at this point, we're not teaching social graces, we're not teaching, politics or religion or anything like that. Right now, we're just trying to keep the child safe and alive. Okay, but as a child gets older, alterations to what they're doing are going to come into play. For instance, when the child is verbalizing but not quite talking yet, you may find yourself being chewed out by a 2-year-old. If that happens, you go again with the stern no. And we're back to the thing we talked about, respecting mom. Children are not going to teach anybody better than they treat their mom or their dad. And it is important for parents to teach the children that there is a hierarchy in the world. In this house, mom and dad call the shots, not the children, and you will be expected to obey and behave properly. Chewing out mom and dad is not something that should be allowed. Pitching fits, temper tantrums, screaming and yelling, that type of thing is not something that parents should put up with. It should be met with a scolding. No, that's not the way we behave. Perhaps a swat or two. Put them into bed and tell them, obviously, you're a good girl, and good girls don't do this, so obviously you're just too tired to be up, so you go to sleep until you can be the good girl that I know that you are. Sometimes in the terrible twos, or maybe a little after, a child will take up the habit of biting people. Now, sometimes if, a stern no, a swat, being put to bed doesn't solve the problem, the parent will end up having to bite the child back to get them to stop biting. If you do that, remember, we're not trying to teach the child an eye for an eye. We're trying to teach the child, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You only need to bite hard enough to get the child's attention and let them know that, hey, this is what you're doing to other people, and they don't like it any more than you, so if you don't want it done to you, don't do it to anybody else. And whether you want to call that, the Christian golden rule or karma, it's something that every child needs to know, that what you put out in the world is what the world is going to give back to you. Sooner or later, when you're swatting a child, they're going to come back with the statement, that didn't hurt. Okay, thanks. I needed to know that. Now it's time to break out the paddleboard. Now the paddleboard is not a ball bat. It's not something you swing like a ball bat or a golf club. The paddleboard should be 2.5 to 5 inches wide, fairly narrow, like 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch wood, and about 18 inches long. The idea is to not bruise bones. You're not swinging it like a sword, like you're trying to cut somebody in two. You snap your wrist and you pop the butt. The idea is to just excite all the pain receptors on the child's backside. The sound effects, those help too. But remember, a normal paddling on a normal child will not normally result in bruises. And again, swats with the paddleboard are not the be-all, end-all of things. It should begin with a stern no, perhaps a nice lecture on what's going on and why it needs to be changed, a few swats with the paddle, and another lecture of, okay, have I got through to you? Do you now understand that we want A, B, C, and D, or whatever? Okay, as a child matures and gets away from being have to be watched 24/7, you have to start implementing rules. And with the rules, there comes consequences. These rules and consequences should be on a sliding scale based on what the infraction is and how frequent the infraction is. Now, one thing you need to remember about putting in rules, you need to put in some exceptions and teach the child the exceptions. For instance, the rule may be never interrupt an adult while an adult is talking. The exception to that rule is unless someone is bleeding, okay? And you have to give the child the leeway to learn these exceptions. So if child comes in with an exception and he honestly believes this should have been an exception, you can't punish them if they were making a good faith effort to follow the exception rule. And like I say, you've got to be paying attention to get these things right. As a child gets a little older and gets into school and starts becoming a little more sophisticated, you can begin to layer the consequences. For instance, the rule may be don't hit your brother or sister without a good reason. First infraction in a long time might just be 1 or 2 swats. If it happens very quickly, you run up the swats. If it happens, way too frequently, you could have some swats, add in some time in isolation in their room or whatever. In my house, the worst thing a child could do was to lie or to hit or disrespect their mother. Now, if they messed up, they might get 1 or 2 swats for what they did, and then 5 or 6 for lying about it. And we talked about this. Okay, this is for what you did, 1, 2, 3. This is for lying about it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now, did you see here with me, son, that, you got 3 swats for messing up and 6 more swats for lying about it. If you mess up and you tell the truth, you've saved yourself 6 swats, right? Children can understand that. Depending on the age and the size of the child, the paddleboard may become ineffectively. In very rare and exceptional cases, you can move up to using a belt. Now, the belt should be doubled over so that it makes a nice sound when it hits, because that sound is as effective or more than the actual pain. But use the belt sparingly. If you find yourself using the belt more than a couple times a year, you may need to bring in outside help, because you've got a problem here that's not being dealt with effectively. Corporal punishment should not begin until the child is basically mobile. And while it may be pretty much a daily thing while the child is young, once it gets in school, it will become less and less needed and effective. Once you get into school and social situations, you can use denial of privileges to a much better effect than corporal punishment. An exception may be if, something that comes up, well, if you're going to act like a small child, we're going to treat you like a small child, and the humiliation of being spanked like a small child is part of the learning process. If one has done their job of disciplining the child effectively, by the time the child is in late grade school, middle school, and high school, corporal punishment shouldn't even be on the table. You should have moved on to more adult, more mature forms of disciplining the child, and it should be less and less so. And despite what people say today, I think that it is entirely possible to produce an 18-year-old man or woman instead of an 18-year-old child to send to college. This method of child discipline has been used safely and effectively for millennia. It's based on the traditional American Judeo-Christian ethic and should result in a reasonably responsible and mature young adult in their mid to late teens. A person that can meet life's challenges responsibly and maturely, and a child that a parent can be proud of for the rest of their life. This is Deacon Parsons saying, do what's right because it's right, and devil take the hindmost.